Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars The Last Jedi discussion video. This is going to be my specific video discussing Rey, and this will be the start of a series of videos where I discuss the characters and other general plot points more specifically about the movie. So starting off with Rey, and we'll go through the other main characters in the next couple of videos. So, the reason I'm starting with Rey is because she was my favourite character in the sequel trilogy coming out of Episode 7, and remains that way after Episode 8. I was overall very impressed with how they used the character in this movie, and really made it clear that they have a good overall main character for this trilogy of movies. Of course, helped a lot by great acting by Daisy Ridley, and just, I think, a very overall likable character, who has similarities, I think, a lot of similarities to Luke from the original trilogy, while also being different in a lot of other ways, in that, of course, by episode 5, 6, you had Luke dealing with, who his parents were, and the fact that they were actually important people in Darth Vader. Here you kind of have almost the opposite direction of, the same kind of basic story, but if your parents are nobodies, and it's just you suddenly in this important position, that you are the only one powerful enough to oppose this other very powerful person, but you are not particularly, known to anyone. You're just this unknown who's come out of nowhere who happens to have that power. And how, even though your parents aren't the important people like Kylo, it still has an impact on you because they're your parents and you're still affected by them, even if they're not famous people. And I really like that reveal. I talked about that in my last video where I discussed some of the common criticisms of the movie. And I don't think Rey needed to have some sort of reveal where she's secretly a Skywalker or something like that. It would have been cool if they gave a good explanation and it turned out that way. But I think the nobody reveal is just as impactful because it creates this really cool dynamic for the character where, as Kylo points out to her, the fact that she was abandoned by her parents means that she now kind of, when she meets people, almost tries so hard to establish those kind of parental connections with people. That's what happened with Han. That's why she's so angry at Kylo at the start of episode 8 for killing him and not understanding why. Because here's someone who had parents who cared for him and he killed them, and then she really cares about her parents and they abandoned her, and she struggles so much with the idea of you had what I wanted, why did you take it out? Why do you have this opinion of destroy the past, basically? And it's the same with Luke. He brings up the fact that that's what you're looking for in Luke, and it's not really what she gets. She gets a bit of a teacher, but she really doesn't get the sort of father figure that she kind of wanted or expected. With Leia, I think she has somewhat of a mother figure, and unfortunately, I don't think 9 will allow us to get much development on that front with what happened to Carrie Fisher. But I could see some potential for some book or comic series, focusing a little bit on the Rey-Leia dynamic in between 8 and 9, because I think Leia is going to be somewhat important in maybe helping to teach Rey to control the Force more, and potentially even some lightsaber stuff, as I'll get into talking about a little bit later on. But yeah, the parents reveal was really well done. The kind of Dagobah-esque scene where she goes down into the kind of dark, kind of the hole, the cave, and looks into the kind of ice, the mirror, and only sees herself, and the idea being that this dark kind of connection shows you what you want to see, and what Rey got was just kind of a hint that it might be her parents, but then it was just herself, highlighting in a way that, of course, they're not alive anymore. It's just you that's left. That, this kind of aspect of loneliness. And I really liked where they went after that with the scene of you had a very kind of distraught Rey talking to Kylo, opening up to him, and it's this very vulnerable moment for her where I think reflecting on it now, realizing that kind of Kylo, there wasn't really that much hope for like a real turn for him. He really was kind of manipulating her and kind of prodding that vulnerability about her parents and to make that connection there. And you could see why Luke was so like, stop this, and really heavily used the Force to kind of stop that connection that was being made. But it spoke to just the fact that because she was getting nothing from Luke, she opened up so much to Kylo and went like almost over the top to the point where she kind of put everything on him. I can turn him. I know I can. We had this connection, and this is what happened. When in the end, we sort of realized that the kind of connection between the two of them was kind of orchestrated by Snoke, and while perhaps it was we sort of know that in a way, like it was Kylo actually having some control over his thoughts and being able to kind of manipulate what people really see within him. And that's obviously what led to Snoke's death, and I suppose it's what led to Rey putting so much faith into the fact that he could be turned, when in fact it was really all about being power hungry. So Rey with Kylo in this movie ends up having this kind of big betrayal moment of where I really do think she was going all in with him, that there was at least a chance of romance. I do think something perhaps could have blossomed if he had chosen to side with the Resistance, like Rey kind of expected him to do. I think we could have seen Rey and Kylo become a relationship, but because immediately after that he turned, I liked that for Rey it was just this immediate moment of like, no, there was no chance she was going to side with him, because she knows that what he's doing is wrong. And I suppose Rey and the dark side in this movie, I like that it wasn't really overly emphasized that she's like falling to the dark side or something like that. That it was just this, what will she see in the the kind of dark cave, and once she realizes that it wasn't going to kind of give her what she wanted, that's not what she needs anymore, she kind of just moved past it. And I really did like that. And then after that point, you knew that there was this kind of resolve within her that she really wasn't going to go to the dark side. There wasn't much of a chance of that happening. In the same way that like they kind of really subverted expectations with Kylo as well, of you expected there to be this further kind of move towards the light, but then by the end of the movie you kind of realized that there was really none of that there, that it was just the hope that because he was somewhat conflicted that he would come back, when really none of his actions really all that much hinted towards the fact that he could kind of he was good and he was going to come back. So it really was just a little bit of confliction on both of their sides, and that they remain one light, one dark pretty much for the most part. I suppose as well as that there was the dynamic of like Kylo being like, we need to destroy the Jedi, destroy the Sith. So Kylo is like a dark side user, but he's not a Sith. But Rey, by the end of the movie, does actually embrace being considered like the next Jedi, despite everything Luke thought her, which I do think is a very interesting decision to make. So the whole Rey and her parents thing is, I think, ultimately leads to a really, really cool thing going forward, that they took this whole idea of like the lineage, the Skywalker bloodline, and then just had a nobody come up and kind of change things. So I do really like that arc. Next thing with Rey is, I suppose, a slightly more negative point, and that is a problem I had with episode 7, and it's a problem I still have with 8, and that is Rey's lack of training despite being portrayed as pretty capable. And especially given how much they compare her to Kylo, it doesn't often feel like there is a gulf in class when there should be. In that Kylo has had training from Luke for a long time, training from Snoke for a long time. He basically, is a master. He or should be on that level, but sort of doesn't feel like it because of some of the way they present him. Whereas Rey is kind of like the opposite of like, she has like no training. She actually has never been trained to use a lightsaber. Snoke says she'd never picked one up before, and then in this movie, apart from a little bit of training she does on her own, she's never instructed by anyone who knows about the lightsaber how to use a lightsaber. Yet she's able to stand just as, tall in the fight against the Praetorian Guard as Kylo is. I'll get to talking about that a little bit more in a minute, but it is just a kind of frustrating aspect of her character in a franchise that kind of focuses on, in the first two trilogies, on training a lot. Of like the prequels are very much, most of the key dynamics between fighters are characters who fight are master and apprentice. So it's clear that every Jedi has had a certain amount of training since they were from a very young age, and then nearly every character that we meet is like with a master, and because of the time skips between movies, a lot of training has happened in between movies, and it's very, very clear where their skills come from. The original trilogy does this quite well, with like Luke not really getting any training in the first movie, in 5 getting some training from Yoda, and then obviously most of the training happening between 5 and 6, and it being very clear of the difference between kind of average, just okay fighting Luke Skywalker versus Master Luke Skywalker in episode 6. So it is a weird thing with Rey, where it feels like she's constantly growing and becoming more powerful without it really feeling like she's earned that kind of power boost or being treated on this level. I get it from the perspective of just pure raw force power, that effectively, going back to midichlorians, that Kylo and Rey more or less have equal midichlorians is kind of what they're saying. They both have the same potential in the Force. One's origin is their bloodline, one's origin is just that they happen to be very powerful. And then the other kind of thing here is, of course, that, okay, Rey is very strong in the Force. And to a degree, I get them utilizing her in the way they utilize her, where she can do a lot of the basic stuff fairly well. She can force levitate the lightsaber into her hand, she can move rocks, that's fine. But lightsaber combat is a skill. It's a skill augmented by utilization of the Force, but it still comes down to the fact that it is a variety of forms and skill. And while Rey seems to be presented as like just naturally being an okay fighter because she has some training prior with a staff, but it not really being clear if that skill level is high or anything like that, given that she's fighting, trained by Luke Skywalker, Kylo, or the Praetorian Guard, who clearly have had tons of training and are a very powerful unit themselves. That's where I think it becomes a little bit of a problem of just, you are not doing credit to the character, treating them this powerfully despite having no training. And there's a way I think they could have done it. All they had to do is, I think, shift that fight around a little differently. Have more of the Praetorian Guard fight Kylo compared to Rey. Like, have it be like Rey only fights 2 or 3, and then Kylo fights like 6 of them or something like that, rather than it the way it played out being like more or less half and half were taken by each of them. And while I do think in the fight ultimately Kylo was portrayed as being the more effective fighter, the more veteran fighter, it still, I think, is a slight problem that Rey was as strong as she was in that fight, despite like disaffectively, outside of the fight with Kylo in episode 7, her first like fight to the death, really. Like, she's had like chase scenes running away from people and that sort of thing, but in terms of just one-on-one fights, like, this is like her first time, really. And for her to be that good is it's a little hard to stomach, just because of how much training, and especially in like the prequels, but also the originals, like it feeling like there was a careful portrayal of how powerful characters are in relation to other characters, and enough feeling quite like the same level of like care went into things here. Now, I think they can fix it fairly easily going into episode 9, because they're obviously probably going to have some sort of a time skip, and they're probably going to have to explain that in that time skip, Rey had a lot of training from the likes of Leia, Force Ghost Yoda, Force Ghost. Luke, maybe Obi-Wan, maybe Anakin. There's a lot you can do with Force Ghosts. And then you can have Rey come in and be as powerful as you need her to be. And it really feel like she is Kylo's equal. And then with the Force powers, I think the only slight issue with her Force powers in this movie I had was when she was levitating all the rocks towards the end, it just feeling like that's a lot of rocks you're lifting up, and it feeling like you have no problem whatsoever lifting those rocks. And especially when she sees Finn and is just like, and then just sends all of the rocks flying to create the path for them. It really felt like the way you've presented levitation prior to this is that it is a struggle. No matter how powerful you are, it's always somewhat of a struggle to lift anything that big. Look at Luke trying to lift the X-Wing out of the swamp. Yoda trying to lift the X-Wing out of the swamp. Yoda in the fight with Dooku when they have their kind of force power kind of fight towards the start of their duel. There's always a sense of like they have to put almost everything of themselves into moving that mass away. Whereas here it just felt like Rey was just standing still and just everything levitated around her. And given that she even with her force powers doesn't have a lot of training, and as much as she like is seemingly this like amazing like powerful person in the Force with great raw power, it just feels like it still feels a little bit overboard for you to portray her like that. Now, again, I really like the character, so it's not something that I think is a huge problem. But for me, in terms of if you really wanted to perfect her portrayal in the sequel trilogy, I definitely wouldn't have gone as far as they did in both of these movies with regards to her abilities. Now, I don't think anything in this movie was as bad as the mind trick scene from episode 7. That one, I think, is sort of indefensible in terms of like, yeah, that is a very technical Force ability. There's no way that's like one of the first times she ever uses the Force. That just, to me, is just a complete, like, yeah, there's nothing really to say about that one. But going back to positives, I really like that the movie kind of ends with her not really having a teacher. Obviously, Force Ghost stuff, as I said before, is going to happen, but also not having a lightsaber. The lightsaber that she's used has been the Anakin lightsaber, the blue one, and it's ripped in half. And the way they show it, it seems like it's fairly intact outside of the fact that it is just ripped directly in half. But you can see that the crystal that's in the lightsaber seems to still be intact. And I think that's probably a key point, in that the crystal of all the components of a lightsaber is obviously the more difficult bit to like procure. So the fact that she has that means that she has effectively the heart of a lightsaber. And given that she's a good good with machines and stuff like that, an engineer to a degree, she should be able to, with a bit of instruction from anyone who knows about lightsabers, be able to construct her own lightsaber. So I suppose the prediction on that would be that she has her own blue lightsaber in episode 9, but that the handle will be her own design that she will have made. The only other potential I see with that is that Luke's green lightsaber, we don't actually see it in the present day stuff. So that's probably still out there. So Rey could very well switch over to using Luke's old green lightsaber. But I feel the connection to her and that blue lightsaber is important enough that they want to keep some of that there. So I think they will keep her as having a blue lightsaber. But I do want to see just that progression of she has her own lightsaber. That it's hers, she made it herself, and that will be another way to showcase that she has become like a master with a lightsaber. That after learning all of the key forms of lightsaber combat and becoming really proficient at lightsaber combat, she's made her own lightsaber to signify that mastery, in the same way that Luke did in episode 6, the same way that Padawans do in like the prequels and stuff like that. You get your own lightsaber, you don't use like a training lightsaber, it's your own specific one to meet your needs. That's why like Kylo's lightsaber is the way it is, because he likes having the really, really powerful blade, because that's the way he fights. And Rey needs her own. Now, obviously, the more kind of crazy out there theory would be that she somehow finds a way to create some sort of a saber staff thing, because it seems like her weapon of choice is a staff, and the sword, single blade lightsaber, it could be sort of a thing where she'd prefer it if it was more like that. So if you took Rey's lightsaber that she has, the crystal, and then Luke's lightsaber, she could create a saber staff like Darth Maul. I don't think they'll do that, because I don't think they want to bring up prequel stuff for some reason. But that would just be a cool idea if you wanted to have a more staff-based style for Rey going forward. But that's that. Just a really cool thing to speculate on is the lightsaber. I would be disappointed, honestly, if we just see her arrive in Episode 9 and she just has repaired the Anakin lightsaber to basically be the exact same as it was. I think it is important that the design of her lightsaber handle be different. So yeah, that's that. So I discussed Kylo and Rey and their very interesting dynamic. I suppose the final thing on that would just be, as we go into Episode 9, does she still have any hope for him going forward? Because a big part of this movie was her really kind of putting herself out there to be like, I know I can turn him, I can see how conflicted he is, that he's being drawn towards the light, but now this big betrayal has happened. So in Episode 9, does she have any sense of hope for him? And if she still does, how does she approach doing that, and how does the movie approach doing that? I think it's more of a discussion for the Kylo Ren video, which I will be doing coming up soon, but I think that's just an interesting point just on Rey. Will she be the one to kind of maintain that there's something left in him? Because it was pretty notable that Luke and Leia both basically said, yeah, we both know he's gone. But Luke does say that no one's ever truly gone, but after saying that, I can't bring him back. So it seems like he's suggesting that maybe someone else can, and maybe that is Rey. But that's that. Luke and Rey's relationship, I thought, was very interesting, because he's turned off from the Force. He doesn't obviously immediately sense that she's Force sensitive, and only notices it when he can just see from the fact that she's kind of wandering off that there's something about her, and that's when he realizes and makes the connection of like, okay, she's a nobody, but she's very, very strong in the Force. And he immediately makes the similarities between her and Kylo of just that raw power, and all he sees from his perspective is that this is going to be another Kylo if I train her. But I like with Luke what they do in this movie is that they emphasize the fact of like, he takes his failures and basically uses them as like a reason to never progress forward beyond that. Whereas I think Yoda, in a way, what he's kind of trying to say is that you learn from your failures and do it better. That, we lost Kylo, Ben, yes, but Rey is here, and she represents, in a way, everything that a Jedi is. She doesn't need to read the books or the texts. She already kind of deep down knows that, and I think you know that too, Luke. And I think it's at that point it's that moment when he realizes that the tree is burnt down, and in Luke's mind, of course, the books are gone. Even though we know, I think Rey has possession of those books, so she kind of can keep the Jedi Order going in whatever way she wants it. She can change it, or she can keep it the way that it originally was. It depends on her approach. But it's after this that Luke obviously kind of comes back into the fray. He does his kind of astral projection thing and says the line of like, I won't be the Last Jedi. And it's this really, it's probably, I think, the best line of the movie in terms of just the impact of it. Because it represents this moment of a big switch from the entire movie basically trying to tell you, there won't be Jedi anymore. Look how negative we are about the Jedi. And him switching right at the end to say that, no, it will continue. I won't be the Last Jedi. It's this big moment. And because we know that it's because of Rey, and that's a huge moment for her to be both, I suppose, currently like the Last Jedi, but also the first in this kind of new era of Jedi. So the ultimate progression of this relationship, from like her handing the lightsaber over, him tossing it off the cliff, to him being back on board with the Jedi and accepting and having such hope with Rey as the new kind of, in a way, leader going forward, the new Force sensitive in the galaxy, that just on its own, I think, makes for just a great arc. And the dynamics that he goes through of basically, before this, trying to basically say, I'll teach you, and I'll help you to understand what the Force actually is, but along the way I'll also highlight why it's not the Jedi that need to come back, that's a problem. But I like that in the way, come the end of the movie, he realizes that his perspective is so negative on the Jedi, he kind of loses sight of that the core positivity of the Jedi always remained. It was just a little, these little aspects of, like, they got a little bit too involved in the politics, they made a few mistakes, but they still fundamentally were this force of good within the galaxy. And it's just this idea that, like, there will always be failures and mistakes, but you can't let them just define everything. And so just the positivity of Rey just talking about the legends of the Jedi actually works really well, of just Luke telling these truths, like, it was a Jedi who trained Darth Vader, and then Rey's counter, like, but it was a Jedi who brought him back. Those kind of, points I thought were just really, really well done. The only, I think, slight issue is just that I wish the training was a little bit more substantial, that he actually had given her a little bit of combat training, had instructed her in terms of maybe some Force techniques directly. Just a little scene to give context to why she's as strong as she is in the fight later on. As I said, I didn't need a full movie of just, like, 30 minutes of, like, lightsaber combat training. That's not what I'm asking for. Just, like, when he sees her doing the lightsaber training on the cliff and looks at it and is just like, okay, she seems to have it, but then kind of walks away when she cuts the rock off. I wish that, like, in a way, he had incorporated a bit into the next training session of, like, it's not about, like, aggression or something like that. It's about the form of the technique, and maybe even said something that represents like lightsaber combat from what we know from, like, the EU, of just like the basic form is like this animal, and look at how this animal actually, like, moves around. That's the way you should be as, like, a lightsaber fighter. They could have done something like that to make a more meaningful lesson about it and use the Force, because that's the thing with the lightsaber forms, is that they are all, like, fundamentally, like, to a degree based around a specific animal and their kind of style of kind of fighting in a way. So the Luke-Rey dynamic was really well done. I think it's definitely the one where, even though I've already seen the movie twice, I need to watch the movie, I think, so many more times to just get everything I can out of the dynamic of those two characters together on screen. The final thing to end with here is Rey and romance in this movie. While obviously it wasn't a focus, I think there were for sure allusions to and hints towards different romances. I think, as I said, if Kylo had made the right decision, we could have potentially seen the start or hint towards Rey and Kylo's potentially being a relationship. I think him putting his hand out to her after Snoke's death really was this kind of big moment of, like, together, like, as a couple, we can rule the galaxy. The other thing, of course, is Finn. In the early on the movie, Rey's constantly, like, send a message back to the Resistance and say hello to Finn for me, and, like, what should I say to Finn? Chewie says something, it's just like, yeah, that's perfect. And just these little moments, like when she sees Finn, they run over, they hug each other. But then there's that moment when she sees Finn then go over to Rose, who's obviously injured, and show a lot of concern for her, kind of more than just, like, comrade is injured, but, like, someone very important to me is injured. And it's this sense of, like, what did I miss? Was I really gone that long where, like, this potential relationship dynamic has completely moved past me? There was definitely a sense of, like, I think what could have been in, like, Rey's, like, looking over at that. Not that she's, like, jealous or anything like that. Just what could have been if my role in this story wasn't so separate from everyone else's. And then I know people have been saying, like, oh, they've also set up Poe as, like, a relationship thing for Rey, because look how happy their meeting was. But I think that scene was just there to have the two characters meet each other and have dialogue together. I think it really was that kind of mechanical within the movie of just like, we're right at the end of the second movie. Two of the main characters have never met before. We kind of need to have them meet to just give any context. If Poe is going to be the leader of the Resistance in the next movie, and Rey is going to be this huge central point of the Resistance, of course they have to like know each other. So they just had to have that scene happen the way it did, and it was fine. It was just that they know of each other from kind of legend in a way, like in a way, like they basically both know each other through Finn, which I kind of like as the dynamic, that Finn kind of knows everyone, but then the other characters don't really necessarily know each other. But yeah, that's the end of the video. Just really, really, really good character. And I had just the complexity that the Rey's parents reveal added, even though the reveal was nobody. That was, I think, one of the most impressive things that the movie did, was making it so much more interesting, the fact that like it was nobody, and that was so well done. The only letdown being some of the kind of how powerful she is with the lack of training, but as I said, not too big of a problem, but two really strong character dynamics really defining her throughout the movie, of her and Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, and her and Luke. Both very, very strong dynamics, helped by the acting on all fronts. So very positive, and I'm really excited to see where they go with the character in episode 9. My speculation right now is that they do lots of training off screen between movies with her to basically make her a master going into the next movie. That would be my speculation. But yeah, that's been the video. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on Rey in The Last Jedi and my thoughts on her. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.